Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Allahumma salli wa sallim ala Sayyidina Mohamed wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. My dear brother in Islam, Dr. Yahya Khairi Abdul Rahman, Chairman, American Finance House and LARIBA Bank. My dear friend, Mr. Tom Macmillan, Vice President Citibank and Chairman, International Visitors Council of LA. I must first say that I'm very deeply touched and very deeply honored to receive this award from the city of Los Angeles and the county of Los Angeles. Mr. Tom Macmillan has been extremely kind and extremely generous to me. I will indeed cherish these awards. I must also thank Dr. Yahya Khairi Abdul Rahman for inviting me here on the occasion of the award for services to Islamic banking. Dr. Yahya has also been abundantly and extravagantly kind to me, and I'm really lost for words. Sincerely, I'm lost for words to thank him for his generosity and kindness. I don't consider myself to have done much for Islamic banking. I did what I could, but I believe that any other person who was working in the central bank and was placed in that position with all the resources available and all the opportunities could have done equally well, if not better. I thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for placing me at the right place and at the right time. This evening, ladies and gentlemen, I'll very briefly present to you in the form of some slides on what we have achieved in Malaysia in the field of Islamic banking. But by way of introduction, let me say that we live in a world today which is full of paradoxes and contradictions. Nations which are resource-rich but economically poor and weak, poverty amidst plenty, and breakthroughs in science and technology coexisting with widespread ignorance. In the context of these paradoxes and contradictions, the Muslim Ummah is now seeking a new order based on Islam. The quest of our destiny has made us more conscious of our ideological and historical identity and has brought us back to the original source, Islam. Deriving strength from our rich traditions, we have the potential, I think, to set an example to the rest of the world. Islamic banking has been around for some 20 years, but it's only in the last 5 years that it has become a booming niche business with almost 100 billion in assets under management. More than 150 Islamic financial institutions operate from London to the Persian Gulf to Malaysia with offices around the world. Increasingly, Islamic banking is being discovered by Western banks as a mechanism to gain access to the large pool of Muslim funds. It is not surprising, therefore, that there is an ever-increasing number of conventional banks providing Islamic investment services to their international clients. What is Islamic banking? Islamic banking must have two basic components. In the first place, it must be Islamic. To be Islamic, it must reflect the values and the norms of Islam. It must have in it social justice. It must not exploit the poor. At the same time, it has to be a system, a proper banking system. And in a proper banking system, there must be an adequate number of instruments to meet varying needs, to meet differing needs. There must be a large number of institutions. One single bank or two single banks do not make a system. And of course, there must be a mechanism to link the institutions and the instruments. And in the field of banking, that mechanism is known as the interbank money market. In Malaysia, there exists today a full-fledged Islamic banking system operating on a parallel basis on a parallel basis with a sophisticated conventional banking system. In addition, a viable Islamic capital market is being created. We often hear the term the Malaysian model when referring to Malaysia's method of implementing Islamic banking. What is the Malaysian model? To explain the Malaysian model, we can divide the 51 OIC countries into 4 groups. The 3 groups are on this slide, and the 4th group will be on the next slide. The 4 categories are, as you can see, countries which only have an Islamic banking system. They do not have a conventional banking system. And the countries that fall under this category would be Iran, Pakistan, and Sudan. In the second category would be countries which have a dual system, 2 full-fledged Islamic banking, 2 full-fledged system, one Islamic, one conventional, operating side by side, and only one country in the world so far. Malaysia has that system. The third system is what I call conventional plus, which is basically a conventional system with 1 or 2 Islamic institutions on the fringe. And the 4th category, of course, is system where there's only conventional banks around and there are no Islamic banks. The uniqueness of Malaysia's approach towards Islamic banking is that so far it is the only country to implement a dual system, namely a full-fledged Islamic banking system operating on a parallel basis with a full-fledged conventional system. Not only do the 2 systems work on a parallel basis, they also utilize essentially the same set of banking infrastructure, the same set of branch network. These have significant implications in terms of cost and speed of implementation. I'm of the view, ladies and gentlemen, that the most important contribution in the field of Islamic banking that Malaysia has provided the world is the dual banking system, the dual banking model, which is a system where Islamic banking services are provided on a parallel basis with conventional banking services. Why was Malaysia successful in implementing Islamic banking? Why did Malaysia succeed where others fail? There are a number of key factors which I consider important in the development of Islamic banking in Malaysia. I've summarized these key factors into 4 categories. One is the political support, the other is the central bank support, the third is the step-by-step approach, the 4th is a comprehensive Islamic legislation, and the 5th is open-mindedness. In Malaysia, we were lucky to have a Prime Minister who has a vision, who has an Islamic vision, and who way back in 1981-82 was willing to take the risk of setting up an Islamic bank, although he knew that he was moving into uncharted waters, because at that time there were very few countries which were experimenting with Islamic bank. There was an interesting article in the magazine Horizon dated April 1993, which said basically that the most important factor for Islamic banking in any country is political support. And the bank categorized the various countries in Asia and Middle East according to the political support that was given to Islamic banking, and only Malaysia came out at the top, as you can see in the next few charts. Only Malaysia was given the excellent and full rating in terms of political support. But political support itself is not the entire story. The central bank too will have to support. In many countries, politicians do support Islamic banking, but it is the central banker who is worried. He is worried normally that if Islamic banking is introduced, he will be upsetting the apple cart, and this would be at the disadvantage of the conventional system. But in Malaysia, we were very lucky because we had, over the period 85 to 94, for 10 years, a central banker by the name of Tan Sri Dato' Jaafar Hussain, the governor of the central bank, who had an Islamic vision and who went all the way out to support Islamic banking. The next important factor in the implementation of Islamic banking in Malaysia is a step-by-step approach. There was no attempt to create an Islamic banking overnight. It took more than 10 years to create a system, and it was done on a step-by-step basis. First, over the first 10 years, after the setting up of the first Islamic bank, the first Islamic bank was set up in 1983, and for the next 10 years, there was no other bank. For the next 10 years, what we did was develop instruments, Islamic financial instruments. And after developing about 20 instruments over a period of 10 years, and checking them out, and making sure that they work, then we started increasing the number of institutions. But even then, we did not set up additional Islamic banks. To save money and cost, we allowed the existing conventional banks to have an Islamic window. So in Malaysia today, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. You can go to an Islamic, go to any bank, walk right and go to the Islamic window, or walk left and go to the conventional window. With the same people, the same infrastructure, and we were therefore able to implement Islamic banking virtually with a stroke of the pen and virtually with no cost, because the same people who are offering these two services. Having developed the Islamic financial instruments and then the institutions, we move on to the interbank money market, which we created in 1994. Excuse me. Having developed the Islamic banking system through instruments, institutions, and interbank money market, we move on to create the Islamic equity market. The Islamic equity market is now a viable, functioning system in Malaysia, and almost half the stocks in the Kuala Lumpur Stock Exchange are halal stocks, are permissible stocks, and Muslims can buy and sell these stocks in the Islamic stockbroking system. There are Islamic stockbroking institutions. There is one Islamic stockbroker who does only Islamic stockbroking, but there are many other conventional stockbrokers who do both, who do conventional stockbroking, but who also have an Islamic window, the same model that we use in the case of Islamic banking. And we have also created a number of Islamic unit trusts to give the system the critical mass. These Islamic unit trusts, whose funds are about $1 billion ringgit now, $1 billion US dollar now, are allowed to invest only in Islamic permitted counters. After having developed the Islamic equity market, we have moved on to create the Islamic private debt securities. I will, because of the shortage of time, I will skip a number of slides. As I said before, we need to create the Islamic equity market, a sufficient number of stocks, which we have. Half the stocks in the KL stock market are Islamic stocks. We have sufficient number of players now, and we have Islamic stockbroking services. As you can see, 61% of the counters are Islamic in terms of counters, and in terms of value, 44% of the total number of stocks in terms of value are Islamic. We are now moving on to private debt securities. For every conventional system, we have developed an Islamic system. We have developed an Islamic alternative. And there is a viable and vibrant Islamic private debt securities market in Malaysia. One of the very important factors which is often not mentioned in discussing the success of Malaysia in developing Islamic banking was that from day one, from the first day in 1983, we started with a full comprehensive set of Islamic banking laws. The practice then in many other countries was to take the conventional banking laws and grant the Islamic institutions certain exemptions on an ad hoc basis. This practice is even prevalent today. But what we did was to have a complete and comprehensive set of Islamic banking legislation from day one. And an important component in that banking legislation was the appointment of a Sharia Supervisory Council in Bank Islam Malaysia. When the first Islamic bank was set up, there was a Sharia Supervisory Council which supervised the activities of the bank from the Sharia point of view. When we extended Islamic banking from that one bank to 50 other banks, we did not create 50 other Islamic Supervisory Councils. We did not. We just kept that one Islamic Supervisory Council, which became the Supervisory Council also for the other 50 institutions. This saved us a lot of time and effort, because had we set up 50 different Sharia Council, there will be many arguments, there will be a debate which could have hindered the progress of Islamic banking. So we kept the Sharia Council to only one Sharia Council, and that enabled us to proceed faster. The next important factor in the implementation of Islamic banking in Malaysia is the practical and open-minded approach that was adopted by the founding fathers. There was a conscious acknowledgement of the need for a great deal of research and development work to be done. Although Muslim scholars had through the ages written excellent expositions on Islamic economics, this is not adequate in the context of the need and requirement of the modern day. Unfortunately, even today, there are some quarters which claim that everything useful about Islamic economics has already been said by Muslim philosophers such as Farabi, Tusi, and Ibn Khaldun. According to them, what is required is merely the political will on the part of the authorities to implement an Islamic economic system immediately in one go. We also realized from the beginning that an Islamic financial system cannot be implemented only on the basis of profit and loss sharing. We were therefore willing to experiment with other forms of financing apart from the profit and loss sharing, as long as such instruments meet Sharia requirements. For example, in the case when an entrepreneur wishes to purchase capital goods, such as machinery, the Islamic bank may provide the machinery itself by way of al-ijara or leasing facilities. In the case of raw materials or trade merchandise, a possible route is the fixed profit markup for the bank known as al-murabaha. In Malaysia too, in the implementation of Islamic financial system, emphasis was always placed on substance rather than label. An Islamic financial system must reflect the values and ethics of Islam, and this was always at the back of our minds. The other important factor in the implementation of Islamic banking in Malaysia was that we avoided reinventing the wheel. It would be counterproductive, we feel, to attempt to develop every Islamic financial product from scratch. Islam requires that we attempt to achieve our objective in the easiest and most efficient way. The conventional banking system has, over the past few decades, developed an array of sophisticated financial instruments, not all of which are haram in nature. Not all of which are haram in nature. Even in cases where the instruments contain elements of riba or other practices forbidden by Sharia, it may be easier. It may be easier in the case of some of the instruments to remove the un-Islamic elements and replace them with Islamic elements. This would be more efficient, certainly more effective, compared to developing entirely new instruments from scratch all the time. Malaysia has come a long way in a short time in the field of Islamic finance, thanks to the vision of the political leaders, the support of the central bank, and the practical and open-minded approach adopted by the authorities. And of course, we owe everything to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, without whose grace and guidance we would have achieved nothing. Let me say a few words about Islamic banking in a larger context as a concluding remark. The Islamic financial system implemented in Malaysia should not be viewed in isolation, but should be seen in the context of the overall Islamic reform that has been taking place in Malaysia and elsewhere over the past 2 decades. Although modern Islamic reform is often presented merely as a response to the challenges of the West, particularly as a response to European colonialism, its roots are certainly Islamic. Islam possesses a rich, long tradition of Islamic revival and reform, Tajdid and Islam. The reason Islam was successful during the early years was based on its ability to assimilate. We see in history, ladies and gentlemen, that the Persian Empire and much of the Roman Empire fell before the Muslims. We saw how Islam quickly established and took responsibility for a new order stretching from the Pyrenees in the Himalayas, an empire larger than the Roman at its height, and followed by political dominion with wealth and with social and cultural advance. The Muslim armies won battles, its decrees were obeyed, the letters of credit were honored, its architecture was magnificent, its poetry charming, its scholarship imposing, its mathematics bold, and its technology effective. The Muslims were not only victorious in the battlefield, but effective in many diverse departments of living. They succeeded also in a relatively short period of time in integrating life into that wholeness that constitutes a culture. They brought into being a new civilization. A great new society rose under their endeavor and guidance, the product of their powerful spirit. Why were the early Muslims so successful? What is the lesson that we can learn from them, particularly in the field of Islamic banking? I'm of the view that the critical ingredient in their success was the ability to assimilate. Many elements went into the making of the Islamic civilization. Elements from Arabia, from Hellenism, from Semitic cultures, from the ancient Near East, from Iran, from India, and from other regions. The achievement of the Muslims, and this point I wish to emphasize, was that they molded these diverse elements into a homogeneous way of life and also carried it forward into new developments. And it was Islam that provided the integration, as it provided also the drive and the power to sustain it. Islamic form was given to every aspect of life, and it was an Islamic pattern that gave the society cohesion as well as vitality. The early Muslims proved not only prosperous, but original and constructive. For us, therefore, in implementing Islamic banking today, we need to assimilate from the surroundings and give it an Islamic pattern, Islamic form. We cannot afford to start everything from scratch. The early Muslims did not do it, and nor is there any reason for us to do it now. On the international front, ladies and gentlemen, there is nothing to prevent Islamic banking to achieve new heights in the coming years on the basis of cooperation. Cooperation not only with Islamic banks, but cooperation also with conventional banks. The fact that Islamic banks operate according to tenets of Sharia is not incompatible with sound business logic. Indeed, the image of an Islamic banker in some quarters is that of one who carries the Quran in one hand and a calculator in the other. Islamic banking is also not incompatible with Judeo-Christian tradition. The moral values do not vary, ladies and gentlemen, whether you are Muslims, Christians, or Jews. In the development of Islamic banking to reach its new plateau and for Islamic financial market to progress from its post-nascent stage, there is a need to move away from financing on a one-off financing basis and to do it on a parallel basis, as has been done in Malaysia. Ladies and gentlemen, as a way of conclusion, let me say that in the field of Islamic banking, the journey ahead is long and tough. We have barely started. The total assets of the Islamic banks today compared to the available funds in the Islamic countries are but a drop in the ocean. Islamic bankers are not yet major market players in the international arena. At present, we are successful only in the sense that our idea of an Islamic financial system has been accepted in the international marketplace. And this is critical, this is important. The journey of 1,000 miles, they say, begins with a single first step. We have taken that first step. If we continue to build on our success, there should be no difficulty, inshallah, for Islamic banking to emerge as a major force within the next decade. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, and once again thanking Dr. Yahya and Mr. Macmillan, I wish to thank you too for patiently listening to my address. Thank you very much.